Alan Royce was the town's most celebrated chef. Emily Keene was his elegant, soft-spoken girlfriend. Rachel Pierce was a feared food critic with the power to make or break careers. On a single, glittering evening inside a five-star kitchen, all three of their lives collided, one with ambition, one with revenge, and one with a deadly final course. What began as a night of praise and perfection ended in poison, panic, and a body bag. This is the true story of how success turned sour and how a single plate revealed a hidden recipe for disaster. In the town of Westbury, nestled between rolling hills and quiet streets, one man stood out as a symbol of success, Chef Alan Royce. He wasn't just known for his food, he was known for his story. A former dishwasher who rose through the ranks, opened his own restaurant, and built an empire around his name. His fine dining spot, the Ember Spoon, was the pride of the town. It wasn't just a place to eat, it was an experience. Elegant tablecloths, candlelight, a carefully crafted menu that changed every season. Every detail had Alan's signature on it. Locals admired him. Tourists flocked to try his forest truffle risotto and his signature dessert, burnt sugar cloud. Food critics praised his creativity, calling his style visionary and flawless. He had even published a best-selling cookbook, filled with rich photographs and poetic descriptions. On television, Alan appeared calm, polished, and humble. He smiled easily, spoke gently, and often mentioned how grateful he was for his second chance in life. But inside the walls of the Ember Spoon, a different version of Alan existed. Staff members whispered behind closed doors. They said he was demanding, obsessive, and unpredictable. One night he'd be generous, handing out bonuses and compliments. The next, he'd explode over a crooked garnish or a late delivery. Employees came and went often. The ones who stayed long learned to keep quiet, do their jobs, and avoid upsetting the chef. Despite the tension behind the scenes, Alan's public image stayed spotless. He funded charity events, supported local farms, and even donated meals to a nearby shelter during the holidays. His fame only grew, and with it came more pressure. Food bloggers posted pictures of his dishes with hashtags like #GeniusAtWork and #RoyceMagic. People started traveling hours just to eat at his restaurant. Reservations were booked out months in advance. No one imagined that anything could shake his success. Then came the invitation-only dinner. Alan planned the event for months. It would be his most important night yet, a private tasting for a select group of food critics, influencers, and potential investors. He promised an unforgettable culinary journey, teasing new recipes and rare ingredients. The event would be held inside the Ember Spoon, but the restaurant would close to the public for that evening. Only the invited guests, handpicked by Alan himself, would be allowed in. The kitchen staff worked around the clock to prepare. Everything had to be perfect: the sauces, the plating, the lighting, even the music. Alan wanted no mistakes. The guest list included powerful names, people who could decide the future of his brand with a single review. One of them was Rachel Pierce, the editor of a national food magazine. Her opinion could launch a chef's career or destroy it. The night finally arrived. Glasses clinked, silverware gleamed, and the guests smiled as each dish arrived. Alan stood by the door, hands folded, watching them eat with pride in his eyes. He thought he had finally reached the top. But before the next sunrise, one of his guests would be dead. The exclusive dinner at the Ember Spoon had all the signs of a triumph. 20 carefully selected guests arrived dressed in evening wear, greeted with champagne and soft piano music echoing through the dimly lit dining room. Each table was decorated with delicate floral arrangements and small cards detailing the 6-course tasting menu. Photographers captured the ambience, influencers posted smiling selfies, and Alan Royce moved through the crowd like a conductor, making sure every detail was in place. The kitchen operated like a well-oiled machine. Dishes went out in perfect rhythm. First, a smoked beet amuse-bouche, followed by seared scallops in saffron broth. As the courses progressed, the praise grew louder. Guests complimented the flavors, textures, and artistry. Everything seemed flawless. Alan had outdone himself. But within hours of the last course being served, the night took a sudden and horrifying turn. Around 3 a.m., 3 guests were rushed to the hospital after experiencing violent nausea, blurred vision, and severe abdominal pain. Among them was Rachel Pierce, the high-profile critic from Gastronome Weekly. She never made it to the emergency room alive. The news hit Westbury like a thunderclap. A death at the Ember Spoon? It didn't seem possible. Local headlines lit up. Social media exploded. Alan Royce, the town's culinary hero, was now connected to a possible food poisoning scandal. At first, people speculated it was a tragic accident, maybe a bad batch of seafood or a kitchen mishap. But something didn't add up. Health inspectors arrived before dawn. They examined the kitchen, checked the walk-in fridge, and interviewed every staff member on duty that night. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The ingredients were fresh, the kitchen was spotless, and food safety protocols had been followed. Then came the toxicology report. Rachel Pierce hadn't died from spoiled food. She had been poisoned deliberately. Her blood contained traces of Aconitum napellus, a rare and highly toxic plant better known as wolfsbane. Just a small amount was enough to kill. The two other victims had only ingested a fraction of the dose that Rachel had received. Their symptoms matched early-stage poisoning but weren't fatal. This was no accident. Someone had tampered with her food. The restaurant was shut down immediately. Police sealed the scene and began treating it as a homicide. Forensic teams went over every surface, took samples from leftovers, and collected fingerprints. Every plate, every utensil, every cutting board became evidence. The question everyone was asking was simple. How had the poison gotten into Rachel's food? Alan Royce was brought in for questioning. Calm and composed at first, he insisted nothing had gone wrong. He said he personally oversaw every dish and there was no way anything dangerous could have slipped through. But investigators were beginning to see a different picture, one that suggested Rachel hadn't just been unlucky. She had been targeted. And in the heart of the kitchen, where every detail was supposed to be under control, someone had served death on a silver plate. As the investigation deepened, detectives turned their full attention to Alan Royce. His fame, reputation, and carefully polished image no longer offered protection. What began as a food poisoning case had quickly become a homicide, and now the chef who once charmed audiences on morning television found himself under the harsh light of suspicion. The first discovery came from a background check. Alan Royce wasn't his real name. A decade earlier, he had been known as Daniel Rourke. Under that name, he had faced 2 arrests, one for credit card fraud and another for forging documents. Though the charges had eventually been dropped, the pattern was troubling. Daniel had vanished not long after the second incident and reinvented himself as Alan, moving to Westbury and starting his culinary career from scratch. This revelation shocked the town. Reporters dug through court records, and soon headlines read, "Celebrity chef not who he claims to be." Alan's past was suddenly public, and people began to wonder what else he might have been hiding. At the same time, detectives began building a possible motive. Rachel Pierce wasn't just any critic, she had a history with Alan. 5 years earlier, she had written a brutal review of the Ember Spoon, calling it pretentious, overpriced, and lacking soul. The review had nearly ruined Alan's early career. He had publicly dismissed it, even joking about it in interviews. But investigators found something else, a printout of that very review in a drawer in Alan's office. The corners were folded, the ink smudged, and a note was scribbled at the bottom in angry handwriting: "Never again." Security footage from the night of the dinner offered more clues. Just 20 minutes before Rachel's dish was served, Alan had been seen entering the walk-in fridge alone. He stayed inside for almost 5 minutes, something unusual on such a busy night. The head server later confirmed that Alan personally plated Rachel's main course, insisting it needed a special touch. A search of the kitchen waste bins revealed an empty spice container, tossed away in the bottom of a trash bag. Forensics recovered a partial fingerprint, Alan's. When the lab tested the inside of the container, they found microscopic traces of aconitum, the same poison that had killed Rachel. With this evidence, detectives believed they had a strong case. The motive, the means, and the opportunity all pointed to Alan. But still, he denied everything. He claimed he had entered the fridge to check a sauce, that he often plated special guest dishes himself, and that the poison container must have been tampered with after the fact. He suggested that perhaps someone on the staff had planted it to frame him. Despite their suspicions, the police hesitated to make an arrest. Something still felt off. Alan may have had motive and opportunity, but his story was consistent, and there were no eyewitnesses. Then a new lead emerged from an unexpected source: the kitchen staff. And with it, the case took a strange and dangerous turn. While Alan Royce remained the primary suspect, investigators began to look more closely at the people around him. Attention turned to Lena Brooks, his longtime sous chef. She had worked at the Ember Spoon since it opened, known for her discipline and near-silent presence in the kitchen. Staff members described her as reliable but distant. She never complained, never gossiped, and always followed orders. But a tip from a former employee led detectives to Lena's apartment, where they found something unexpected: a small, leather-bound journal tucked behind her spice rack. Inside were pages of tightly written entries, mostly about her daily life in the restaurant. As investigators read through it, a darker picture began to form. Lena had been unhappy for years. She described Alan as controlling and manipulative, detailing moments of humiliation, insults, and unpaid overtime. One line, written just a month before the dinner, stood out: "He's a fraud, and one day, he'll taste the bitterness he serves others." This discovery placed Lena under suspicion. She had access to the kitchen, the ingredients, and the plating process. But when questioned, she was calm. She admitted to being frustrated but firmly denied any involvement in the poisoning. Her story didn't change under pressure. She even voluntarily offered her fingerprints and DNA for comparison. Still, the case was far from over. Forensic reports revealed something strange. Rachel's dish had included an edible flower not listed on the menu. It was pale purple with jagged petals, identified as Viola sororia, a flower Alan had used once before in a spring salad years earlier. It hadn't been ordered for the event. No one on staff had prepared it. That detail opened a new door. Photographs from the event showed table decorations with matching flowers brought in by Emily Keene, Alan's girlfriend. Emily had helped decorate the venue and was seen moving freely between the dining room and kitchen throughout the night. When asked, she said the flowers were for aesthetics and had nothing to do with the food. But a second search of the restaurant's trash bins told a different story. Hidden beneath torn wrapping paper in a discarded gift box, police found a tiny glass bottle. Inside were traces of aconitum, and lab tests confirmed both Alan's fingerprints and Emily's DNA. The evidence was undeniable now. Someone close to Alan had played a dangerous game, and the final chapter was about to reveal just how far that game had gone. The discovery of the poison bottle changed everything. It was the missing piece investigators needed. The traces of aconitum inside matched the toxin found in Rachel Pierce's system. Alan's fingerprints on the bottle confirmed he had handled it. But it was the presence of Emily Keene's DNA that truly cracked the case open. Emily was brought in for questioning again. This time, she didn't maintain her calm. Faced with the evidence, she broke down and confessed. She admitted to bringing the poison into the restaurant. She claimed she hadn't intended to kill Rachel, only to frighten her. Years ago, Rachel had fired Emily from her job as a junior editor after a heated workplace argument. The dismissal was public, humiliating, and had made it difficult for Emily to find work in publishing again. When she learned Rachel would be attending Alan's exclusive dinner, old anger resurfaced. Emily confessed to placing a small amount of the poison on a flower garnish meant only for Rachel's dish. She thought it would cause mild illness, enough to send a message but not to cause real harm. She had told Alan that the flower was part of a surprise garnish she wanted to include for visual flair. Alan, caught up in the rush of the event, hadn't asked questions. He trusted her, but the dose was far more potent than Emily realized. The aconitum was pure and fast-acting. By the time Rachel had finished the dish, it was already too late. Alan, though not the one who introduced the poison, had helped plate the dish without checking it thoroughly. He also withheld knowledge of the flower's origin when first questioned. This made him complicit in the crime, even if unintentionally. The law viewed it as obstruction and accessory to manslaughter. In court, Emily was sentenced to 15 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter. Alan received a 3-year suspended sentence along with 2 years of probation and a permanent mark on his culinary license. He was also ordered to close the Ember Spoon. Lena Brooks never returned to professional cooking. She moved out of Westbury shortly after the trial, leaving no forwarding address. Today, the building that once housed the Ember Spoon sits empty, its windows dark, its sign removed. Locals pass by in silence, remembering the night when a flawless dinner turned fatal. A night where revenge was served quietly, beneath layers of garnish and gold.